Chapter 56. Luli. Mazin bin Malik was waiting in the inn's tavern when they returned. The moment he saw them, he rushed past the occupied tables with disconcerting purpose and handed them a burlap sack. Luli peeked into the bag and stared. "Relics," Kadir said, confirming her suspicions. They both looked at the prince, who raised his hands and said, "I can explain." And so, as Luli donned her merchant's robes, he told them about the young jinn murdered in the souk and of the thief who killed him. Luli presumed even Aisha bint Luas must have despised the man if she'd encouraged Mazin to steal from him. There was only one thing that bothered her about the situation. Namely, that was the compass had not led them to Tawil's stash. Kadir smiled faintly when she brought it up. "Kalila knows the future," he said. "She led us to where we needed to be." Luli was in too good a mood to bring up her dislike of destiny. She was glad at least that the relics had ended up in their hands, so she could sell them to people who weren't members of the murderous 40 Thieves. She was about to follow the prince out of the room when she paused and, out of habit, turned back to search for the bag of infinite space. Her stomach sank when she remembered it had been lost in the ruins, but at least we recovered our most important belongings, and her eyes wandered to the shamshir sheathed at Kadir's hip. He raised an eyebrow at her. "Have you not noticed I have been wearing it this whole time? Why would I leave it in a place any simple thief could break into? You had it displayed on the wall of our room for years. Dahlia would be insulted if she knew you were so skeptical of her security." "You know that's not my point." She followed Kadir down the corridor and toward the entrance where the prince was waiting for them. "I told you I would keep this blade safe. Here, that means carrying it on my person. You think you'll ever use it? I know it's hardly an enchanted knife, but an object's worth isn't determined by whether or not it is enchanted." His lips curled into one of his familiar not quite smiles. "Besides, I have no doubt this blade will serve me. I just hope the day I must rely on it is far in the future." Luli hoped so too. On the cliffs, Kadir had told her they were a team, and as his comrade, she would do her best to make sure he did not have to use the shamshir. She would rather he carry the blade around as an accessory forever than feel pressed into using it as a last resort. But if he did ever have to use it, she hoped it was as efficient as it was elegant. When they met the prince at the door, he insisted on accompanying them to the souk. "You saw me work," he said cheerfully. "It's only fair I get to see you deal with customers." They set up shop in the foreigners' souk, a small market on an outlying isle where travelers sold goods from all over the world. Because the souk was filled with visiting merchants rather than established ones, there were more stalls than buildings here. Merchants packed and left at a moment's notice, so the souk was always in flux. As a result, there was always stalls available. It was at one of these unembellished stalls that Luli began to sit up. She settled into the comfortable routine of eavesdropping while she displayed her relics. Normally, she would have kept her ears out for potential customer leads. Now, she found herself listening for news of Ahmed. She wished he were here to see her work. Gods knew the last time she tried to sell relics in his presence, it had ended in bloodshed. And yet, even after the suffering of that night, he had still smiled at her when she left, had still been able to make her heart flutter with nothing but a flowery promise and a hand kiss. Tentatively, Luli prodded at the possibility she always tried to dismiss, a future in which she accepted Ahmed's marriage proposal. She pictured them wandering the desert together, living adventures they were only ever able to share as stories. She imagined them sleeping together beneath the stars and bantering beneath the sun. And then she thought of Kadir, and the dream dissipated. Shame heated her cheeks as she returned her attention to the stall. What was she thinking? It didn't matter that Ahmed was kind to her. He was still a jinn hunter and a devout believer who would kill Kadir if ever he realized the truth about him. She suppressed a sigh as she returned to her work. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Prince Mazin wandering the souk, staring in awe at imported goods, intricately patterned glass lanterns from the west, topaz-centric jewelry from the south, eye-shaped charms that warded off evil from an island to the east. His wide-eyed amazement drew her back into the present. He thought those shops were impressive. Wait until he saw hers. He hadn't made it far when she announced the opening of her business. A crowd formed immediately, staring at the merchandise with hungry eyes. Lily felt a profound peace wash over her as she charmed, bartered, and batted her lashes at potential customers. By the time the stall was emptied, she was nearly drunk with the euphoria. When the prince approached from the outskirts where he'd been observing, she grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him. "We're rich!" she cried. It was true. They had gone from being dirt poor to having enough coins to bathe in. Normally, it would have been a satisfactory amount. Today, it was a small fortune. The prince shook his head, looking dazed. "Truly?" Kadir looked up and said, "We're going to need a bigger bag." Lily grew mournful as she remembered the bag of infinite space, but then brightened at the prospect of having so much of her weight be in gold. They ended up splitting the coin to carry it, and because Luli was in the mood to celebrate before they set off tomorrow, they purchased entry to one of the entertainment ships winding through the city canals. It was in essence a luxurious floating tavern where patrons drank with abandon and poets and musicians took the stage to tell scandalous tales and sing lewd tunes. The ship cabin was large but cozy. Tables lay scattered beneath the sea of shisha smoke, occupied by grinning guests who whispered and laughed over expensive drinks. Above the crowds hung dimly lit lanterns that bobbed like sleepy fireflies in the darkness, dappling the walls with warm firelight. For the first time in months, Luli forgot herself in that dreamy space. She drank and laughed and savored the fuzzy, pleasant feeling brought on by the alcohol. She marveled at the intricately designed swaying lanterns hanging from the ship's ceiling and grinned at the smoking storyteller on stage who looked as if he were floating on colorful clouds. "So now you know," the storyteller cried. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes glassy. "If you cut down a tree without knocking on the roots, you invite a jinn into the world." Lily snorted as the storyteller stumbled from the stage to uproarious applause. He was replaced by a small band of men playing uplifting music. Lily bobbed her head and reached for her wine, only to find it gone. "Your lips are stained," Kadir said. He twirled the glass in his fingers, brows raised. She grinned. "And yours aren't stained at all. Give me my wine, dry man." When she reached for it, Kadir leaned back and drained the glass. Lily shoved his shoulder, but she was laughing. The wine made everything so pleasant. "Dry no longer," Kadir said as he set down the glass. Luli wiggled her brows at him. "I dare you to get absolutely drunk." "I dare you not to," Kadir sighed. "I would rather not have to carry you to the inn." "I can walk just fine." She stood and swayed. When Kadir reached forward to steady her, she grabbed his hand and leaned forward with a conspiratorial smile. "Dance with me?" "I'll pass." "You're a grumpy old man." She pried her hand from his and twirled away into the crowds. At first, she could hear Kadir calling her name, but then his voice was just a thrum beneath the drums. A current of ululation rippled through the room. Luli saw women flipping their hair, men clapping their hands. There were a few people at the center performing a Depka line routine. She recognized one of the men, Prince Mazen. He was smiling. He'd been smiling for hours, and twirling across the ship was with surprising grace. Mid-spin, he caught her gaze. His smile grew brighter, and he held out a hand. Luli did not realize she'd rushed forward to take it until their fingers were pressed together and they were circling each other. The prince pulled her toward him. "Are we still rich?" Luli grinned, criminally. He laughed, and it was the raw, unchecked laughter of a child. Luli was awed by him, by this strange man who smiled even when his world was falling apart. He looked at ease here, every bit the handsome, bright-eyed storyteller who'd opened up to her in the souk. Handsome, huh? It's a good thing Dahlia isn't here to suggest marriage. She gripped his palm. "Please tell me you know how to dance." The prince grinned. "Of course. What kind of decadent would I be if I didn't?" He shifted his hands so that their palms were pressed together. Then he raised their joined hands in the air, and they danced. More than once, Luli nearly tripped on his feet. "Are you sure you know how to dance, Alnazari?" The prince's grin was a slash of mischief on his face. Luli had not known he could smile like that, with a challenge in his eyes. His words sparked something in her, a fire usually only Kadir could call forth. When they next spun, she purposely overstepped and stomped her foot down, close to his instep. The prince stumbled back, mouth open in a comical "oh." She batted her lashes and said, "I think you should watch your own feet, Prince." He quickly recovered his composure. The next time they spun, it was he who jutted his foot out, trying to catch her off guard. It continued like that, their movements less a dance and more an intimate obstacle course in which they both tried to avoid each other's feet. Luli stopped swaying and started dodging, making the world tilt every step. By the last pluck of the oud string, she was too exhausted to anticipate the prince's last movement, a sweep that to everyone else looked like a bow. Instead, he swept her off her feet. Luli fell against him. She felt the rise and fall of his chest as he laughed, the warmth of his hands at her hips as he steadied her and said, "I think this means I win." She stood there, fingers bunched in his shirt as she struggled to hold herself up. As she became aware of the prince's heartbeat and of the contours of his body against her own, she wondered, suddenly, what it would be like to be able to lean on someone without feeling vulnerable. To trust someone so implicitly, not just with her heart, but with her body. For the second time that day, her fuzzy mind conjured an image of Ahmed. She imagined him sitting beneath the stars, smiling softly as he raised a glass in her honor. "Tonight, let me serve you." She wondered what it would be like to rest her head on his lap, what his lips would feel like on her neck. She shoved herself away from the prince, heat staining her cheeks. He blinked. "Al-Nazari?" She turned and walked away before he could grab her. She pushed into the crowd, which was developing into a blur of vivid colors, crooked smiles, and too loud laughter. She tried to focus, but her mind was still on the damn Wally. Smiling, charming Ahmed bin Walid, whom she'd turned down every time because he was a murderer, because he killed Jinn like Kadir, and because deep down she was terrified of commitment, of trusting someone. Abruptly, she hit a wall. She stepped back and looked up, only to realize it was not a wall at all, but Kadir. There was concern in the hard tug of his mouth. Ready to leave? Luli squeezed her eyes shut. Not yet. She eyed the effervescent bottles lining the bar shelves. "I need another drink." She needed to stop thinking. She needed to stop feeling. Otherwise, she'd be in for a rough night.